So at last, we've actually got to the meat of the course and the reason why you're watching this. We're going to be running a demonstration. We're going to be building a C# class library, and then we'll start to convert our VBScript modules. And then ultimately, we will build an app designer app that's going to use these things. But before we do that, we just need to understand a few of the concepts that we're going to be using, and also making a bit of a decision on how we're going to structure our DLLs and our classes. So first of all, we need to define a naming convention for the DLLs. You could create a DLL for each namespace, and if you did that, then it might look something like this. You might have an employee namespace with a class of person and the methods and properties in it, and it would create a standalone DLL called employee.dll. You could then create another one called sales order utilities, maybe a class name of sortoi, which is the business object, sortoi bits, and have methods and properties, and it will create another DLL, and so on. And all very, very simple. But you can almost immediately see that you're going to get an explosion of DLLs, which might be what you want, but it also creates a deployment issue. You can imagine different sites having different versions of all sorts of bits and pieces. So I tend to shy away from that kind of approach. I prefer to go down a single DLL which holds multiple classes. So in this instance, I have a namespace of my Syspro utilities or utils, and I put all my classes in there and the methods and properties of it, and it creates a single DLL, which works extremely well. It makes it very, very easy to deploy because I've only got one thing to deploy, but it also allows me to build into that DLL things like versioning, online help, and a few other bits and pieces, so that I'm not having to replicate it all the time. And this is the model that we're actually going to be doing in our demonstrations. We're going to create one DLL, put all our classes in it, and see how we go from there. So let's have a quick look now at what the steps that we're actually going to be doing. We're going to be creating a Visual Studio solution called Course Examples. I am using Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition for this course. You could use Visual Studio Code or the full-blown Visual Studio, but beware of licensing. And I do cover this in the previous course. Remember that licensing of these products, because they're Microsoft ones, not Syspro ones, is your responsibility, not Syspro's. So we're going to be creating a single project called Syspro Utils, which will create a single DLL for that. And it's going to hold the employee class and something I'm calling sortoi bits. And we may add a couple more of extra classes. I'm going to be using Copilot in GPT 5.1 to convert the VBScript code and copy to the relevant project. I'm doing that really for speed. I'm still practicing and getting confident in code conversion. We'll discuss this a little bit later on, but these conversions tend to, it writes very, very good code, but it's in a different style and you still have to do things for it, but we'll cover that a little bit later on. And then we'll create another project to create a test harness in the solution so we can test the classes we built outside Syspro. And I find that it's absolutely crucial. If you're able to develop stuff, classes with all the logic in it, and then test it outside Syspro and it doesn't work, putting it inside Syspro is not going to make it work. But if you're able to say, well, it works in a test harness and it doesn't work in Syspro, then you at least are able to say, well, I must have something wrong in my custom pane or my app or something like that. And then finally, what we're going to be doing is creating an app that's going to use the new DLL. So let's have a quick look at the structure of our solution. We're going to create course example. We will have a project called Syspro Utils, and then we'll have a number of classes, person, sortoi bits, and I've added a log file one in there as well if time permits and it doesn't drag the course on too long. And then we will create a test harness. So let's get on with demonstrating that to you, and hopefully we'll get it all working. The first thing we need to do is load Visual Studio. So let's get on with that. And the first task we want to do in Visual Studio is to create a new project, which we will do. There we go. And that first project will be a class library because we're creating classes, which is okay, fairly straightforward. So notice that our project name and our solution name at this moment in time are the same. That's not actually what we want. So our first project is going to be called my Syspro Utils. The location is important. You need to browse for where you want your solution to go. As it happens, this is defaulting to where I actually want it to go. And then we change the solution name. I'm going to call it course examples. But the key factor here is that the project name and the solution name are different because we're going to be having multiple projects within our solution. Our projects will be at my Syspro Utils and a test harness later on, which we'll see. So what we do is we press next. The framework that we're working towards is .NET 8.0. That's what Syspro C# scripting compiles to at the moment. If you have any other frameworks installed, I have 9. If you try to compile that and then use it in Syspro, it won't work. It'll come up with an incompatibility error. So at the moment, you need to go to .NET 8.0 as the highest you can go, but you can also, if you've got any others like .NET 7, it'll also work as well. So we create that. And now we can start to see on the right-hand side here our Solution Explorer, where we've got our course examples and our first project, and it by default has created a class for us. So what we're going to be doing first of all is taking our person class and seeing the VBScript one and converting it to something that we can actually use in C#. So let's have a look at that. What we do here, or what I've been doing, is if I have a look at my VBScript, which we can do here, just bear with me. So if we copy all that and then go to something like Copilot, we can say, please convert the following VBScript to C#, and we paste that in, press enter, and hey presto, just like that, it creates us our class. Now, as I said to you before, this is very trivial conversion, and you've got to be careful, but you do need to understand what it's creating. We've covered this before in a previous course, but basically it's creating a public class called person. It's got a couple of internal variables. It's got its primary method there for when you instantiate or you create person. Then we've got our first property with a get and sets, and our second property, and there's our say hello. So we will just simply copy this. We will go back to our code and we'll pop that in there. Okay, and if we just simply compile that, so we can right click that and say build, we shouldn't get any errors because it's very simple. The only difference we've got is that our class, our CS is different from our class, which doesn't really matter, but it does make sense that we rename it person. So what we've got now is we've got our solution, we've got our first project, and we've got our first class. So what we can do next is start to build a test harness to check that this actually works. So that's what we're going to do. So the next step we need to do is to create a test harness for our class that we've just done. So to do that, what we're going to do is add another project to our solution. And to do that, we highlight the solution, we right click, select, or to add a new project. It's going to be a WinForms project. We're going to call it test harness. It's going to be going the same location as before, so which is good. We're going to use the same framework. We say create. And what we find here is that we've got a design UI. We've got our solution has changed. So now we've got our class and we've now got a test harness. It's all looking quite good. What we do want to do though is rename the form, because it would be useful to have it something like test harness. So what we can do here is go something like test harness. I'm just calling it the same name as the class, but you don't have to. What this is prompt is saying is you've renamed the file. Do you want me to go through any of the code that references it and change the name? And we do. So it will do that, which is good. I'm quite happy with that. And so what we also want to do maybe is change the text on the form. Let's call it something like my Syspro utils. That means test harness. Oops, why don't we put a space in there? So you can see that's just changed the title of the window at the top. Next thing we want to do is bang a button on here because we want something to press to do some code, which is fine. Whenever you put a control on a form, it's good practice to name it something so that it's always unique, but you want to be able to set it to something that means something. And we want some some text. So we'll say, oops, show person, looking pretty good. Might as well save all that whilst we're at it. So what we want to do now is when we press the button, we need an event so that we can run some code. To do that, the simplest thing is just double click the button and you can see that it'll actually put the event in for us, which is nice and neat. And the very first thing we want to do is go person P equals new person. And oops, so what we want to do, I'll explain that in a minute. And so what we should be saying is, oh, I've got a class called person. I want it to go to variable P, and I want you to, we call it newing up, but basically create a new one. And it's put a red line underneath it. And you're saying, what the hell's happening here? And what it's saying is a type or namespace name person could not be found. Are you missing a using directive? So you kind of look at that and think, what on earth does that mean? Well, if you remember when we were doing the last course with C#, we had to tell the C# scripting that it was referencing other DLLs, and this is exactly the same. So what we have to do with the dependencies on test harness here is say, well, hang on a minute, you are a WinForm thing, but I'm actually want you to reference stuff in this class. So what we do is we go here and we add a project reference because the project's in our solution. All we've got to do is tick this and we say okay. And what we will find is that our project reference will go in here and we do put a using in here, which will be my Syspro utils. And hey presto, just exactly the same as we saw in the last course. As soon as we put the using in, it says, I know what we're doing. I understand what a person P is. So I'm just going to quickly just copy a little bit of code that I've got in another form. Just bear with me 2 ticks. And paste that in there. So what we're saying is when we press the button, I want you to new up a new instance of the person class for Andy in the first name, later in a second, and I want you to say hello to me. So let's see what happens. Now, we can compile this and then go and run the exe, or we can run it directly from the compiler. But notice that if we do that, how on earth does it know which of the classes to actually run? And this one is highlighted or in bold. What that actually means is if I press this run button, it's going to try and run the bold one, and it's not going to work. So what we need to do, click on Test Harness, right click it, set as Startup Project. Now it's bold. And if we run this, compiling it, running it, there's our form. And if we press Show Person, there's our Andy Latham. So what we've actually managed to do now is not only create a working class, we've just proven that it works, but we've also started to create a test harness. Now, in my experience, the test harness tends to start very, very simplistically, but if you put a little bit of time to it, you're able to ship the test harness with your control. So if you get a support call, oh, it doesn't work with XYZ, the very first thing I would do is say, well, would you please run the test harness and check that it actually works? And therefore, you're still working out whether it's your C# class that's at fault or whether it's your C# scripting that's at fault. So we'll move on and start to add a little bit more, a few more classes. The next class I want to add is one I've used to use a lot when I was doing VB scripting, and that is a class that made it simpler to turn on and off logging to a log file. So let's just have a quick look at that code. It's a very old one, as you can see. Gosh, that makes me feel very old. But basically what it does is we give it a file name, and there's a couple of properties that says whether you want to log or not. So the advantage of this was you could build in this logging to a file and then just have a single switch saying, do you want it on or off? So what we'll do, I won't bother boring you with all the detail. We'll just have a go, shall we, chucking it at Copilot and seeing actually what it does. So we'll do what we did before. We will copy it all. We will fire up Copilot. Convert the following VBScript-to-C#, and we'll paste that in, press enter, and see what it does. Still working, so here we go. It's using system.io, which is fine. There's a class called log file. We can see a couple of internal variables. There's the initiation or the instancing method. There's a log file name property, we get in the set, log required, and so on. So it's looking not too bad. What else can we do? So what we can do is say, please add timestamp to the output. Okay. And in doing that, you see it's added a timestamp. It's put today's date and time in it, modified the line. So that's looking pretty good. So what we'll do is we'll copy that code and we will nip back to Visual Studio. First things first, though, we've got to create the class. Now, we're not creating another project. We're going to be putting the class in Syspro Utils again. So we want to add a class, and we're going to be calling this log file. And we'll add that. Looking good. Okay, and then what we can do is we can replace that with our code. I know it's a cheaty way of doing things. Those using statements we want up here. So you see I'm having to slightly adjust the code, but I just want to pause here and just a bit of warning. I've been practicing this for a while to do the video, and it seems very, very easy. Grab a load of VBScript, chuck it at Copilot, copy and paste, and away you go. And you can create vast amounts of C#. But if you don't understand the code, please, please, please stop. It only takes a short while to sit quietly and read it and try to understand what it's generating. If you don't understand it, then stop and don't use these automatic code generators. You need to understand what you're generating. So just a bit of warning on there. So I'm just going to change one thing. I don't like this default file name. I'm going to call it my Syspro utils. That's a default file name. So it's looking quite good on there. There are no errors. We would see errors coming on here. So what we need to do now, maybe go back to our test harness and test it. So we could add another button to output a file, but tell you what we'll do is we might as well chuck out a message into a log file there. So I do have a little bit of code on another thing here. Right, okay, let me just do that. Control C, just bear with me 2 ticks whilst I don't want to bore you with writing a load of code. So basically the log file class, now because we're using my Syspro utils up here, it understands that log file is a class in that namespace. So it's quite happy. I'm setting the file name. I'm saying I want a log required. I want you to start a new log file, and I want you to write a line which is in fact the same as up here, p.sayhello, which is fine. So let's run this and see actually what happens. Up comes our thing. There's our message box for the hello Andy, and if we press that, it should have written something to the log file, and the log file was called temp Andy, so we might as well go and have a quick look at that. So let's try and file up a file explorer, and we will chuck down here andy.txt. There we go. Date and time, which was timestamp, and there's our message. So it's as simple as that, basically, to convert relatively simple classes. So what I'd like to do now is just add a couple of bits and pieces to our class, and then I'm going to come back and continue. So I'm just going to pause the video, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, time has moved on, and I've been tinkering away with a number of things which I want to bring you up to speed on. First things first, though, on the classes that we had written already, which is log file and person, I just want to show you or stress the importance of documentation. This is very, very simple, but it's not difficult to bang in the date, the author, and what it's supposed to do, and ideally some usage information or example, something like that. You can see it's very, very straightforward. If we have a look at something like the log file, it's a little bit more detailed in that I've actually got usage, and then I've identified properties and methods and so on like that. But also with the log file, what I thought is a good example is this. All the classes will inherit from a base class a method called toString, and normally that sort of gives details of what the class is, but one can override it. And you can see here what I'm saying is I want to override the method, the standard method called toString, and when you call toString, I want you to do something else. And what I've actually done here is created a string variable, and I'm outputting the log file name and whether the log is required or not. So if I invoke a log file dot toString, which I'll do in a minute, I'm going to get the response back. And here is an example of how you can build in ways of finding out what your properties are set to. If you build in either an override on a toString, or you may even build a help method into your class to be able to diagnose it very, very quickly. And if we have a look at that, all I have done on the test harness is to pop in a message box.show, lf dot to string, and it will return that sort of thing as well. So what else? The other thing I've been doing is I did have a class that I wrote again many years ago in VBScript that used to take a great long string of text. This was inbound from an external system, which was longer than 45 characters. And of course, you can't pass a comment line into the sales orders via the Sortoy business object that's longer than 45 characters. You have to break it up into lots of comment line elements. So this VBScript did just that. It actually took the string, it replaced special characters, it got rid of duplicate spaces, reduced the number of line feeds and so on like that, and then chopped the long message up into 45 characters and then built as many comment line elements as you needed to be able to give back to Sortoy to say, add these comments to the sales order. Can't remember, well, it was in 2009 I wrote it. So let's have a quick look at what's happened there. I did exactly the same technique as before. I just chucked it at Copilot and it did stuff. If I have a look at the code though, I've put my comments in here and the usage is very simple. We simply new up the Sortoy bits. I chuck in a great load of text, which has come from somewhere like a text box, into text to comment line, and then it returns a string which I've popped somewhere else. So I'll show you what I've done there. In the test harness, I've also been working a little bit, tart it up a little bit. There's our original button, but now I've got a little panel with some edges on it, a little bit of title saying I'm testing the Sortoy bits class. I've got something in here that will be a comment line that's greater than 45 characters. And when I press it, it's going to do the conversion, put the answer in here. So in fact, if we have a look at the code, as we initialize the form, it initializes its components, and it's going to run something called populate long string, which is a little method I've created, which basically bangs in a great long string into that box. And then when we press the button, which is create comment, it's just simply going to take that long string from the text box, bob it into the method and return it back to there. So let's have a quick look and see how that might work. Okay, so there's our populate long string going in there. And if we do this, you can see that it's actually generated loads and loads of comments. And if we add some more characters to see what happens, then we press this, we'll see some more characters, see what happens. And it's clever enough to break it on the word boundary, not on the, not just chop a word in half and so on like that. So this gives you an idea, and what I'm trying to show you is, in my view, the best way of generating an awful lot of these classes is build them into a single namespace, so you get a single DLL, and then you can build a test harness to test them all. So the next step, we now know that our person works, our log file works, and our sortoi bits work as well, because our test harness works. So we now need to take that DLL, put it into Syspro and build an app around it. And that's actually what we're going to be doing next.